Hello, World of Music class. With me today, I have my special guest, Professor Dennis Anderson. I met him as my professor at Orange Coast College, and he has been just a wealth of information and knowledge. I actually chose the Gamelan to do this podcast on because I do eventually want my master's in ethnomusicology, but I also believe that it's something amazing that he has composed, and I'll give him the chance to elaborate on that a little bit. But first of all, Professor Anderson, do I have your permission to record this?
Yes, you do.
This is for the World of Music Final Podcast Project. Well, part of your education and accolades, you've received 2 Fulbright scholarships and studied at the Krakow Music Academy in Poland, as well as receiving your Master's of Music and Composition at the University of Michigan and your Bachelor's of Music and Composition at Cal State University of Fullerton. And among being an educator at Orange Coast College, other than being an educator, your experience in commercial music, including being a commentator for A&E's special with Paul McCartney, The Space Within Us. You've been a writer, an artist and representative consultant, a TV and recording engineer and producer, composer, music producer, audio engineer, sound engineer, music arranger, and live sound engineer. Concluding to your composer credits, you've composed chamber music, electronic music, multimedia theater, and orchestra. Your publisher's website is right here. Professor Anderson, if you'd like to give any kind of intro, I just thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for doing this, Nicole. I'm very impressed with your work. I always have been, and I'm glad to see that you're exploring this whole new realm of media production. Um, I guess a little bit about me. Just a quick explanation. I've always been a musician ever since I could remember. I started playing accordion when I was 5 years old, and I didn't know that that wasn't cool until the Beatles showed up and realized they don't have an accordion in that group. So that led me more to get interested in pop music. When I got into college, essentially the crazy thing about it was I really didn't know what I wanted to do in college. I just knew, graduate high school, start at Orange Coast College down the street and see where that led. And I ended up deciding to major in music. So that led me over to Cal State Fullerton into their composition department and decided that composing music would be a great way to go. I've always felt very creative. A composer in particular, Krzysztof Penderecki, had composed some very powerful music that was very different, very abstract. He was working with quarter tones and very, very dissonant music. And his piece, The Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, was an extreme inspiration for me. And I even designed a course on the Beatles, and that was how I ended up being involved in the Paul McCartney.
While I was at Orange Coast College, you elaborated on a piece that you composed called Gamelan. I was most impressed with your composition was the fact that it's Eastern music that, has more than just half tones, but quarter tones as well as complex rhythm, and you were able to notate that with Western notation.
Have the term gongan, which refers to the metric cycle. And, we talked about meter in our first module, and whereas, rock music in Anglo-American music tends to be in 4 beats. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? With gamelan music, gongans can be very extensive. You can have so many beats. You can have 64 beats and 128 beats, and so the metric cycles are a lot more complex than what we will see in other examples that we're talking about this semester. The gang beat is the beat that's played by the largest gong, and usually it's played at as a punctuation mark for the cycle. So if you have a 16-beat cycle, it might come at every 16 beats.
Next slide, we're going to go into your piece a little bit. We'll play a little bit of the audio, and I want to show how you've notated this, as well as given an instructional and introductory on how to introduce this piece to Western music. All right, I just want to give a little introductory and then see if you'd like to elaborate.
This piece, Gamelan, and a friend of mine, when I was an undergrad, approached me with the idea of composing a piece for his senior recital, a percussionist. And so I thought, okay, for Jay, I'll compose a marimba piece. He'll be the marimba soloist, and then I will embed that solo part inside of a percussion ensemble piece based on gamelan. So if we were to look at just the visual score of that piece, we would see that it's actually for the percussion ensemble's part consists of circles. So each musician is playing a little series of events, short events that move one after another around the circle. This is a compositional process that a composer by the name of George Crumb was using, and I was very inspired by his music. And the reason I was inspired by what he was doing was the fact that it's improvisatory in terms of the general sort of detailed formal structure. Each musician chooses when to move to the next event as they move around the circles. So they'll play circle number 1, all of those events with whatever instruments they have. Each musician in the ensemble has a small assortment of different kinds of instruments, a gong or a tam-tam, some kind of a triangle or a bell sound, a brake drum sound. I use actual automobile brake drums as one of the instruments in this piece because they sound so much like actual authentic gamelan instruments. In terms of notation, it's not a problem at all to perform a piece like this. To find pitches and instruments that are available to us inside of MIDI sound libraries that would work and be somewhat close to what you can get from these actual instruments. So when we have the percussion ensemble consisting of each musician has a mallet instrument of some sort. And then, as I mentioned, some sort of bells or tam-tams or the brake drums. So we get that sound world going by the combination of adjacent pitches within these particular instruments that we're using, the vibraphones, the xylophones, the marimbas, tubular bells, the chimes. And the trick to get the sound to be more like the gamelan sound is to use adjacent major seconds, and in some cases, minor seconds. But the idea is this. Each musician, whenever they're playing the pitched instrument parts, are playing with 4 mallets, and percussions hold mallets. They're able to control mallets in such a way, they're able to control mallets so that they can change the actual intervals between any 2 pitches with their mallets. Now, they can't do 3, so they can't play chords,
Right.
but they can do 2 notes in a hand. That gives them the 4-note chords that they can do. But with this piece, instead of playing chords, they're playing adjacent major seconds. So if you were looking at a keyboard, you'd be playing the 2 black keys next to each other or the 2 white keys next to each other. So the notation is set up that way. So if we were to look closely at all of these pitches, it looks frightening because everything is all adjacent seconds. But these are diatonic seconds. Remember that, okay? They're not minor seconds unless we have an E and an F together or a B and a C. Otherwise, it's always going to be that sort of open sound, giving us that kind of round bell-like quality that we get from those gamelan instruments. So once we start this piece into motion, we have several factors that all come into play. We have a soloist who's going to start at the beginning of his page of music and just play relentlessly 16th notes all the way through the entire piece of music until he gets to the end. Whereas the other musicians are going in a more unpredictable way, in a more improvisatory way. Each musician moves around a circle and then moves to the next circle after they have completed all of the parts on each of those circles. The circles themselves alternate between pitched percussion instruments like a vibraphone or a marimba or a xylophone, or another circle that would have the other non-pitched instruments, the gongs, the triangles, finger cymbals, break drums, things like that. So that's how we get this kind of gooey tonality swirling around in this piece with this factor. The 16th note is the beat. As long as everybody is considering that tempo of the 16th notes, then the music flows and it locks together, and we have this wonderful kind of driving force that begins in a kind of a random way. The first, in other words, the soloist doesn't even begin playing until the first circle has been, whoever is playing it, the first circle is completed. That's when the soloist would begin his or her part, and they play through just 16th notes start to finish. What brings everything together is the coda at the end of the piece. There's a repetitive pattern on the last page of the circle page or down at the bottom of the soloist. That pattern is repeated over and over as each musician gets through all of their music. Then they drop down into the coda and start playing this repeating pattern. And one at a time, each musician stops the momentum and restarts with the others that are playing in that coda, such that it's out of phase with itself, and gradually, without realizing it, it pulls together until at the end of the piece, everybody is on that repetitive pattern, and it goes through itself twice, and then it ends. So the musicians will all group together as this timing comes together down at the end of the piece, and the coda finishes the piece off. So throughout the piece, we have the world of the tonality of the gamelan. We have all of these patterns that are getting played by 4 different musicians. Okay, remember, each musician has a different group of instruments, different sounding instruments, but they're all playing exactly the same notes. So as they rotate through, we have built-in form. We have the repetition coming back, the familiarity coming back from the musicians that are on the stage surrounding that soloist. So we're hearing the same music and the same little motives over and over, but it keeps moving around from one musician to the other. So the piece just takes on a life of its own as it goes through its little world. And that's the gamelan piece.
And I'd like to post that, on the YouTube link so everyone can hear the full piece as well. Thank you personally for your time again, and Orange Coast College is lucky to have a treasure like you there that's so willing to open, ideas to other students and share your knowledge. I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate that you wanted me to partake in this, and it's been a lot of fun.